You think you're breathing air. You're breathing the end of the world. Every inhale pulls in molecules that have been everywhere, touched everything, carried the history of industry and empire and extraction into your lungs where they become you. You are made of the catastrophe. The catastrophe is made of you. There is no separation. There never was. Timothy Morton wants you to stop pretending you can see the thing that's killing you. You can't. It's too big, too distributed, too temporarily massive to fit inside your field of vision or your lifespan or your capacity for moral panic. It exists at a scale that makes a mockery of your perception. You only ever see pieces, symptoms, the hurricane, the wildfire, the drought, the flood. But those aren't the thing. Those are just a thing touching you for a moment before it moves on to touch someone else, somewhere else, somewhen else. This is hyperobjects. This is living inside entities so massively distributed in time and space that you're always already inside them before you know they exist. Global warming, capitalism, radiation, plastics. These aren't problems you face. They're the medium you exist in, the water you're swimming in. Except you're not swimming, you're drowning. And the drowning has been happening so slowly, so incrementally, that you learned to call it breathing. Morton says we've entered the age where humans finally created things as powerful as the gods we used to fear. Except we're not worshipping them. We're denying they exist even as they reshape every aspect of our existence. We're living in their digestive systems and calling it civilization. We're being metabolized by our own creations and wondering why we feel so exhausted all the time. The apocalypse isn't coming. That's the comfortable lie. The lie that keeps you consuming, planning for a future you're simultaneously destroying. The apocalypse already happened. It started before you were born and it will continue long after you're dead. You inherited it like a genetic disease. You'll pass it on like a curse. And in between, you'll live inside it, pretending you're living beside it, watching it happen to someone else somewhere far away. This is about the objects that are too sticky to escape, too viscous. They cling to you, they penetrate you, they make your decisions before you think you're making them. And the worst part isn't that they're killing you. The worst part is that you're them. Your body is microplastics, your bloodstream is pesticides, your neurons fire on coffee grown in deforested soil, shipped across oceans burning fuel that warms the air and floods the coast and displaces the people who needed the coffee to survive. You are the mesh. You are the entanglement. You are complicit not because you made bad choices, but because there were never any good ones. The game was rigged before you arrived. The hyperobject was here first, and it will be here last, watching you, digesting you, wearing your face while you sleep.
835 feet. .com.
Let's start with plutonium. One atom of it in your hand would be unremarkable, invisible. You wouldn't feel it, you wouldn't see it. But that single atom has a half-life of 24,000 years, which means in 12,000 years it will still be half as deadly as it is right now. In 24,000 years, half again. The decay curve stretches forward into a future where your language doesn't exist anymore, where your species might not exist anymore, where everything you ever loved or feared or built has turned to sediment. And that atom is still there, still radiating, still killing whatever gets close. That's a hyperobject. Not the atom itself, the temporality of it, the way it refuses to respect the boundaries of human time, the way it makes your lifespan look like a sneeze. You can't point to where plutonium begins or ends because it's distributed through time in a way that makes nonsense of your calendar. You encounter it only in moments, local manifestations, the contaminated soil, the warning signs written in languages that will be dead before the danger is. Timothy Morton says hyperobjects are things so massively distributed in time and space that you never perceive them directly. You only ever touch pieces of them, edges. You mistake the piece for the whole and then wonder why your solutions don't work. Why recycling doesn't stop climate change. Why your reusable bags don't unfill the ocean. You're trying to solve a hyperobject with human-scale tools. You're bringing a knife to a gunfight that's happening across centuries. Global warming is the perfect example. You can't see global warming. You can see weather, you can see the storm, the heat wave, the season. But global warming is the statistical entity that makes those things slightly more probable, degree by degree, decade by decade. It's not the hurricane. It's the invisible shift in atmospheric conditions that makes hurricanes stronger, more frequent, more catastrophic. You can't photograph it. You can't point to it. You can't hold anyone accountable for it because everyone's accountable for it. And accountability, distributed across 8 billion people and 300 years, becomes nobody's fault and everybody's inheritance. This is what Morton wants you to understand. The biggest threats aren't distant. They are intimate. They are closer than your skin. You're made of them. Your body is a museum of industrial civilization. Microplastics in your organs, PFAs in your bloodstream, heavy metals in your bones. You didn't choose this and you can't choose this. The hyperobjects chose you before you were born. They became the cellular structure. You are the catastrophe in human form. Capitalism is a hyperobject, not the transactions or the markets or the quarterly earnings or the stock prices. Those are symptoms. Capitalism is the invisible entity that produces those symptoms. It's the logic that makes exploitation inevitable. The system that turns everything into commodity and then sells you the cure for commodification. You can't step outside it to examine it. You can't critique it from a neutral position. Every thought you have about capitalism happens in language capitalism shaped. Every rebellion against it gets monetized. Every radical idea gets absorbed, repackaged, and sold back to you as a lifestyle brand. Morton calls this viscosity. Hyperobjects are sticky. They adhere to you. You can't wash them off because they're in the water, in the soap, in the impulse to cleanse yourself. They're inside your conception of inside and outside. They make your boundaries porous. You thought you were an individual, but you are a node in a network, a momentary configuration of forces you didn't create and you can't control. The hyperobject moves through you the way weather moves through the atmosphere. You're not separate from it. You're what it looks like when it takes human form. This is Morton's horror. You're living inside the thing that's killing you, and you can't leave. There's nowhere to go, no outside, no escape hatch, no pure position from which to mount resistance. You are compromised from birth, complicit from your first breath. The air you breathe is someone else's exhalation, is industrial exhaust, is the breath of forests burning, is carbon dioxide warming the planet that will flood the coast, that will displace millions who will become refugees, who will be blamed for their own displacement by people who are also drowning and don't know it yet. The hyperobject teaches you that scale destroys meaning, or maybe it creates new meaning. Meaning at the scale of geological time, of atmospheric chemistry. You can't mourn at this scale. You can't grieve individual losses when the loss is everything, always, forever. So you don't grieve, you go numb, you dissociate. You focus on the small things you can control because the alternative is staring into an abyss so vast it doesn't even notice you're looking. But Morton says, well, you should fucking look anyway. Stare into that bastard and let it stare back. Because the hyperobject is already inside you, already deciding your future while you pretend you're deciding it yourself. The object too big to die is the object you're living inside, and it's not dying, it's transforming, taking new shapes, moving through new mediums. And you are one of those mediums. You are the shape it takes when it wants to know what it feels like to be afraid of itself. You are not the center of this story. You never were. That is the first comfortable delusion that has to die. You thought you were the observer, the rational agent standing outside nature with your clipboard and your plans for improvement. You thought you were the protagonist in a narrative you understood. Cause, effect, resolution. The old stories. The stories that stopped working the moment you realized you'd changed the chemistry of the entire atmosphere without meaning to. This is the Anthropocene, the age where humans became a geological force without becoming geologically wise. We are carving our mark into the stratigraphic record. Future paleontologists will find a layer of plastic and concrete and radiation and know exactly when we were here. They'll call it the boundary layer, the line between before and after. Except we are living in the transition. We are the catastrophe in progress. We are the asteroid strike happening in slow motion across 3 centuries. Morton calls this asymmetry. The disconnect between cause and effect stretched across so much time and space that moral responsibility becomes impossible to locate. You get in your car this morning, 50 years from now a coastal village in Bangladesh disappears underwater. Where's the connection? Where's the villain? Where's the moment of choice where you could have done differently? There isn't one. There are 8 billion moments, spread across decades, distributed through systems so complex that blame becomes meaningless and guilt becomes weather. You want justice. You want proportionality. You want the punishment to fit the crime and the crime to have a criminal. But hyperobjects don't work that way. The crime is collective, the punishment is collective, and the timing is all wrong. The people who suffer most contributed least. The people who contributed most will die before the consequences arrive. There's no karmic balance, no moral arc bending toward anything, just physics and chemistry and thermodynamics playing out across scales that make mockery of your need for narrative resolution. This is why climate change feels unreal even when you know it's real. Your brain evolved to handle immediate threats, the lion in the grass, the snake in the tree, not the statistical probability of increased drought intensity across the next 40 years, not the parts per million of carbon dioxide that won't matter today or tomorrow, but will matter catastrophically to people you will never meet. Your threat detection system wasn't built for hyperobjects, so it treats them like abstraction, like someone else's problem, like future fiction. But the problem with the future is that it keeps arriving, and it looks exactly like the models predicted, and still you can't feel it, can't hold it, can't make it emotionally real enough to change your behavior in proportion to the threat. This is what Morton means when he says the world has ended. Not the physical planet, the world as concept, as frame, as the stable container for human meaning. That world ended when we realized we had destabilized the container itself, when we understood that there is no outside, no nature separate from culture, no environment apart from the beings doing the environing. The asymmetry is also aesthetic. Beauty and catastrophe have merged into something new, something we don't have language for yet. Every sunset is more vivid now because of the particulates in the atmosphere. The pollution makes better photographs. The glacier is most beautiful in its dying, most photogenic as it carves into the warming ocean. You stand on the beach on a perfect day and you can feel it. The borrowed time, the stolen moment. The fact that this perfect day exists on a graph trending toward uninhabitable. Morton says we are experiencing grief for something that hasn't died yet, and also died before we were born. Mourning the future, mourning the past we thought we had. Living in this weird temporal space where loss is constant but never final. The apocalypse isn't an event. It's a condition, a state of being. You're not waiting for the world to end. You're living in the world that's ending. Present continuous tense, always happening, never complete. This is ecological melancholia, the depression that comes from knowing too much and being able to do too little, from seeing the systems and understanding the trajectory and still having to get up every day and participate, still having to pay rent and buy food and make small talk about the weather without screaming that the weather is killing us, without saying that every conversation about anything else is a form of denial, an agreement to pretend that normal exists. The asymmetry breeds a specific kind of paralysis. If your individual choices don't matter at the scale of the hyperobject, why choose differently? If the catastrophe is already locked in by emissions from decades ago, why sacrifice anything? Why not just enjoy the party while it lasts? But that logic is the hyperobject thinking through you. That's the system protecting itself by convincing you that you're powerless. You are powerless at the scale of the hyperobject, but you're not powerless at human scale, at the scale of the people next to you, the communities you're part of, the systems you can actually touch. Morton doesn't resolve this paradox. He sits in it. He says, yes, your choices are both infinitely important and entirely insignificant. Both are true. The hyperobject operates at a scale where both things can be true simultaneously. You have to learn to hold that contradiction, to act as if your choices matter while knowing they don't matter enough, to fight for change while accepting that change might come too late, or in forms you can't predict or want. This is the age of asymmetry, where effects outlive their causes, where responsibility is distributed beyond recognition, where you're complicit in catastrophes you oppose and benefit from violence you condemn, where every breath is betrayal and every meal is compromise, where the apocalypse is boring, bureaucratic, administrative. It is not the dramatic ending, but the slow administrative wind down of habitability. You wanted meanings, but you got systems. You wanted heroes and villains, you got feedback loops and tipping points. You wanted to matter, and you do, just not in the way you imagined. Not as the protagonist, as the medium, the thing the hyperobject moves through, the way it experiences itself. The moment it becomes briefly conscious of what it's doing before forgetting again and continuing anyway. Forget the nature documentary. Forget the pristine wilderness untouched by human hands. Forget the fantasy of balance and harmony and the lion laying down with the lamb. That nature never existed. It was always a story we told ourselves to feel better about the separation we invented. Nature over there, humans over here. Clean lines, clear boundaries. The comfortable delusion that we could step into nature on weekends and then step back out into civilization on Monday morning. Morton calls this dark ecology. Dark because it refuses the light, refuses the cheerful environmentalism of solar panels and electric cars, and the idea that if we just make better consumer choices, we can shop our way back to paradise. Dark because it sees what's actually there instead of what we wish was there. And what's actually there is the mesh, the infinite interconnected web of beings and things and forces where everything touches everything else and nothing is pure and nothing is separate and nothing gets to opt out. The mesh means you're entangled permanently with everything. The coffee you drink connects to deforestation, which connects to species extinction, which connects to climate change, which connects to drought, to famine, to migration, to border walls, to the politics you hate and the violence you deplore, which connects back to you, to your morning ritual, your small pleasure, your need for caffeine to face another day of participating in systems you can't escape. The mesh doesn't judge you for this. The mesh doesn't care. It just is. And you're in it. You can't be pure in the mesh. Purity is another fantasy from the old world, the world where you could wash your hands and actually be clean, where you could recycle and feel righteous, where you could buy organic and believe you've made a moral choice. But the organic apple still required water from aquifers depleted by industrial agriculture, still required transportation burning fossil fuels and agricultural systems entangled with the very extractive logic that we are trying to avoid. The mesh tangles your good intentions with everybody else's compromises until there's no clean path, only degrees of complicity, only better and worse versions of being stuck. This is what makes dark ecology dark. It doesn't offer you redemption. It doesn't give you a way to feel good about yourself. It says you're part of the problem because you're part of the system, and the system is the problem, and there is no outside the system. Your existence is violent, not because you're evil, but because you are alive. Because being alive means consuming. It means displacing. It means taking up space that other beings need. The mesh makes peaceful coexistence impossible at the same time that it makes coexistence mandatory. You're stuck with each other, all of you. Predator and prey, parasite and host. Locked together in a dance that nobody choreographed and nobody can stop. Morton says we are nature. Our cities are nature. Our technologies are nature. Our catastrophes are nature becoming aware of itself and recoiling. This is not metaphor, it is taxonomy. We are animals, evolved and biological and subject to the same physical laws as everything else. We just happen to be the animals who developed consciousness complex enough to destroy the conditions of our own existence and sophisticated enough to rationalize doing it anyway. The apocalypse is an autoimmune disorder. That's the insight dark ecology keeps forcing on you. We are not fighting an external enemy. We are the body attacking itself. Industrial civilization is the immune system gone haywire, killing the host to protect it. Every highway is an antibody. Every factory a white blood cell. Every technological solution to problems caused by technology is the fever spiking higher. And you can't stop a fever by asking it nicely to calm down. You have to address the infection. Except the infection is consciousness itself. The infection is the belief that we are separate from what we are destroying. Dark ecology demands that you sit with this. Stay with the trouble. Don't flee into optimism, which is just denial in a cheerful mask. Don't collapse into nihilism, which is also denial but with better music. Stay in the discomfort. Feel the mesh tightening around you. Feel your complicity. Feel your powerlessness and your responsibility existing simultaneously like a cone your nervous system has to solve. This is the spiritual practice for the end of the world. Not transcendence, not escape. Presence, attention, the willingness to look at what's real, even when what's real is unbearable. But this is where Morton finds something like hope. Not hope for salvation, and not hope that we will fix this before it's too late. Hope as radical acceptance of what already is. If everything is connected in the mesh, then your small actions ripple. They matter. Not because they'll save the world. Mattering isn't about scale. It's about participation. You are a node in the network. What you do propagates. Who you are affects the pattern. The mesh doesn't distinguish between important and unimportant. It's just processes. Transformation and redistribution. And you are part of that processing whether you like it or not. So you might as well act like it matters. Might as well make your participation intentional instead of unconscious. You might as well choose how you want to be entangled, since you can't choose whether to be entangled. This is just being awake to the mesh instead of sleepwalking through it. Being present to your connections, your impacts, your place in the pattern. Not because it will change the outcome, because being present is the only alternative to dissociation. And dissociation is what got us here. Dark ecology says the mesh is suffocating and beautiful, deadly and generative, horror and home. You don't get to choose which one. You get all of it at once. The spider eating the fly is nature. The fly struggling is nature. Your disgust watching it is nature. Your inability to look away is nature. The whole brutal, beautiful mess of being alive in a system where life feeds on life and death feeds life, and everything else is constantly being broken down and rebuilt from its own ruins. That is not the circle of life. That is the mesh, and you are in it, rotting and growing simultaneously, dying into the next version of what living means. Your home is haunted. Not by ghosts, by I know it's Halloween, but by materials, by history compressed into objects that you touch every day without thinking. The drywall is gypsum mined from quarries that destroyed aquifers. The paint contains titanium dioxide extracted through processes that poison watersheds. The carpet is petroleum. The insulation is fiberglass. Your home is fossil fuels and industrial chemistry pretending to be shelter. You sleep inside the extractive economy. You dream inside its digestive system. And you call this comfort. Freud had a word for this feeling. Unheimlich, the unhomely. The familiar rendered strange. The moment you realize that what you thought was safe and known has always been alien, foreign, other. Your home isn't yours. It belongs to the supply chains that built it, the corporations that mined its materials, the labor that was exploited to make it affordable, the systems of extraction and production and distribution that assembled themselves into the shape of domesticity and convinced you it was yours. This is what hyperobjects do to intimacy. They make everything uncanny. Your body is the most intimate thing you have. Your body is also a landfill. Microplastics, PFAs, flame retardants, pesticides. Your liver is processing chemicals that didn't exist when your grandparents were born. Well, my grandparents, yours might be a bit younger. Your cells are made of the Anthropocene. You are industrial civilization in flesh form, walking, talking, pretending to be separate from what you're made of. Morton says this uncanniness is educational. It teaches you that the subject-object divide was always fantasy. You thought you were a subject experiencing objects, observer and observed, self and world. A nice clean separation. But you're an object too. You're matter, carbon and hydrogen and oxygen arranged temporarily into a pattern that thinks it's permanent, that thinks it's special, that thinks it has boundaries, but your boundaries are permeable. Everything passes through air, water, chemicals, ideas. The mesh moves through you the way blood moves through veins. You are not containing it, it's expressing itself as you. This is where Morton's philosophy starts to sound a bit Buddhist, or post-humanist, or maybe just accurate. The ego is a hyperobject, distributed through time, inconsistent and multiple, never fully present to itself. You are not one person. You are a succession of persons who share a name and a body and a rough continuity of memory. But the you from 10 years ago is dead. The you from 10 years forward doesn't exist yet. And the you right now is just a momentary coalition of impulses and habits and neurons firing in patterns they learned from a culture that learned them from other cultures going back thousands of years. You're a process pretending to be a thing, a verb disguised as a noun. The climate crisis is also an identity crisis. Both are about realizing you are not who you thought you were, not in control, not separate, not the autonomous individual that modernity promised you could be. You are ecology happening. You are geology becoming conscious of itself just long enough to feel guilty about being geology. Just long enough to realize that consciousness doesn't free you from physical laws. It just makes you aware of them whilst you continue breaking them. But there's something tender in this too, something almost loving. If you're made of the same carbon atoms as the tree outside your window, as the fossil fuel that powers your car, if all of that is true, then you are related to everything. Kin to the oil spill, family with the glacier, cousin to the extinct species. Morton calls this coexistence, not harmony and not balance, just the acknowledgement that you are stuck with each other, entangled and implicated. You are made of stars, that's the comfortable version, the inspirational poster, the thing people say to feel cosmic and important. But Morton makes it uncomfortable, because you're also made of dead plankton, dead forests, dead civilizations compressed into crude oil. You're made of extinction events, mass die-offs, the carbon cycle playing out across billions of years. You are not special stardust, you are recycled death, animated temporarily, given consciousness briefly, and then you will return to the mesh, feed the bacteria, nourish the fungi, become soil, become plant, become food for something else that will briefly think it's separate before it dissolves too. It's cheerful, this one, isn't it? This is intimacy at geological scale, where the personal and the planetary merge, where your heartbeat and the carbon cycle are both just rhythms in a system that preceded you and will survive you, where love means acknowledging that everything you love is already dying, already dead, already transformed into something else while you were trying to hold on to it. The mesh doesn't let you possess anything, doesn't let you keep anything, it just lets you participate, lets you be the shape it takes for a moment before it moves on. The uncanny becomes a doorway. Through it you see that horror and love aren't opposites. They are perspectives on the same entanglement. You are attached to things that are dying. That's not tragic, that's just accurate. Everything dies. Everything transforms. The mesh doesn't end, it redistributes. And you are part of that redistribution. Your grief is the mesh becoming aware of its own constant loss. Your love is the mesh celebrating its own constant transformation. You are not separate from either. You are the place where both happen simultaneously. Morton says, look, we are all in the belly of the same beast, all being digested by the same hyperobject, and all haunted by the same uncanny realization that home was never home, that body was never body, and that self was never just self. Everything is contaminated. Everything is entangled. Everything is intimate with its own destruction. And that intimacy is all you have. So you might as well feel it. You might as well be present to the horror and the beauty of being briefly alive inside the thing that's eating you, being briefly conscious inside the catastrophe, and being briefly able to name what's happening before you become it completely. So you're awake now, you see the hyperobject, you feel the mesh tightening, you know you're complicit and powerless and responsible all at once. You know all of this. And you still have to get up tomorrow, you still have to live and to decide what to do with the time you have inside the catastrophe. Morton would tell you to stop waiting for the answer, stop looking for the plan that will fix everything, and stop treating the ecological collapse as a problem with a solution instead of a condition with a response. The hyperobject isn't interested in solutions. It is too big for solution, too distributed, too temporally massive. You're not going to reverse climate change with a recycling bin, and you are not going to dismantle capitalism with the right boycott. You're not going to save the world because the world as you understood it already ended, and what's left is something stranger. What you can do is stop pretending, stop performing optimism you don't feel. Stop forcing yourself to have hope when what you actually feel is grief. The grief is real. The grief is appropriate. And it's the only sane response to watching everything you love become precarious. So grieve. Let the grief be political. Let it be refusal. Refusal to pretend things are fine. Refusal to accept the logic that says we have to keep growing, keep extracting, keep accelerating toward the cliff because stopping would be too expensive. You make art. You tell stories. Not because art will save us, because art is how you stay human inside the dehumanizing, how you keep feeling inside the numbing, how you remember that you are more than a consumer, more than a data point, more than a unit of production in an economy that would grind you into paste if it could figure out how to monetize your bones. Art is the practice of paying attention, and attention is the first act of resistance. You cannot fight what you can't see. The hyperobject wants to stay invisible, wants you to forget it's there. Art makes it visible, makes it feelable, makes it real enough to respond to. You build relationships, community, networks of care that aren't mediated by markets or states or platforms that surveil your intimacy and sell it back to you as content. You learn to depend on people. You become dependable. You practice mutual aid not as charity but as infrastructure, as the social fabric you'll need when the other infrastructures fail. And they will fail, and they are failing. The mesh is collapsing in some places and reconfiguring in others, and you need to be entangled with people who will notice when you're struggling, who will share what they have, who understand that survival isn't individual, it's collective. It always was. You fight for policy, for regulation, for the systemic changes that actually move the needle even though they'll never be enough. You vote, you organize, you show up to the boring meetings. You call your representatives even though you know they're captured by the same hyperobjects you're trying to resist. You do it anyway because the alternative is surrender. The alternative is letting the worst impulses of the system go unopposed. And opposition matters, not because you'll win, but because fighting is how you maintain your humanity when the system wants you to be passive and compliant and asleep. You practice what Morton calls attunement, sensitivity to the ways you're connected, the ways your choices propagate through the mesh. You don't need to see the whole hyperobject to feel your way through it. You don't need to understand the global carbon cycle to notice that flying less means burning less fuel, that eating less meat means less methane, that buying less shit means less extraction. These choices won't save the world, but they are not nothing. They're how you shape your participation, how you decide what kind of node in the network you want to be. You stay present. That's maybe the hardest part. Staying present to the hyperobject when presence is unbearable, when every headline is another study confirming what you already knew, another species gone extinct, another record broken, another tipping point crossed. The temptation is to dissociate, to scroll away the dread, to binge whatever content makes you forget for a few hours that you're living through a mass extinction event. But dissociation is what got us here. The ability to know something terrible and not feel it, to see suffering and not let it change you. Presence is the antidote, staying with the trouble, feeling it fully, letting it break your heart, and letting your broken heart make you dangerous. Morton's politics are slippery because he refuses easy answers, refuses to tell you what to do. But that's the point, isn't it? The hyperobject is too complex for simple prescriptions, too contextual. What works in one place doesn't work in another. What matters now might not matter later. You have to figure it out in real time, responding to conditions as they emerge. This isn't relativism, it's realism. It's acknowledging that the catastrophe is ongoing and your response has to be ongoing too. Adaptive, improvisational, willing to fail and try again. You accept that you can't fix this. That's the liberation hidden inside the despair. You can't save the world. The responsibility is too big. The problem is too distributed. The hyperobject is too powerful. But once you accept that, you are free to act anyway. Free to do what you can with what you have where you are. Free to fight without the burden of believing your fight will succeed. Free to love what's dying. Free to build what might not last. Free to be human in the ruins of humanism. What you do inside the nightmare is you stay. You don't escape into fantasies of collapse or apocalypse or technological salvation. You stay here, in the mess, in the mesh, in the hyperobject that's digesting you. You stay awake, stay angry, stay tender, stay willing to be surprised by what's possible when you stop waiting for permission to act like the world is ending. Because it is. And you're still here. And being here means something. Maybe not what you thought it would mean, but something. And something is what you have to work with. Something is all you ever had. Timothy Morton doesn't give you hope. He gives you coordinates. He says, here's where you are, inside something so massively distributed in time and space that your entire life is a footnote. A momentary flicker in a process that started before you and will continue after you. You are inside the hyperobject. You've always been inside it. And the inside is the only place there is. This is the philosophy for people living in the aftermath of a catastrophe they are still causing. For anyone who's ever felt the vertigo of knowing the planet is dying while still having to pay rent, still having to show up, still having to pretend that normal is a thing that exists when normal ended decades ago, and nobody bothered to tell us. Morton names what you've been feeling in your body but couldn't articulate. The dread, the numbness, the cognitive dissonance of participating in your own extinction while acting like you're planning a future. Hyperobjects teach you that scale is everything and nothing. You are too small to matter at the level of geological time, at the level of atmospheric chemistry, at the level of systems so complex they make your intentions irrelevant. But you are not too small to matter at human scale, at the scale of the person next to you, the community you're part of. The small resistances that ripple through networks in ways you can't predict. Both things are true. You have to hold both. That is not paralysis. That is the human condition in the Anthropocene. Morton offers clarity instead of comfort. The clarity of seeing what you're inside, of admitting complicity, of knowing that complicity doesn't mean surrender. You are entangled with the catastrophe, so fucking act like it. Treat the apocalypse like the home you never left, the home you were born into, the home you'll die in. Not because you chose it, but because choice at this scale was always an illusion. The hyperobject chose you, made you, shaped you from materials it provided, and now you're awake inside it. Now you know. The nightmare isn't coming. The nightmare is here, has been here. So wake up inside it. Open your eyes, look around, see the mesh, feel the viscosity. Acknowledge the ways you're stuck. The ways you're complicit, the ways your life is threaded through systems of violence and beauty you can't untangle. And then do something anyway. Not because it will save you, but because doing something is how you stay alive to what's real. How you refuse the numbing and maintain your humanity inside the thing that wants to metabolize you completely. The hyperobject is the only object there is. Everything else is just what we call the pieces of what we can almost see, almost name and almost understand before it swallows us again and we remember we were never outside. We were always inside, always implicated, always part of the thing we thought we were studying. Morton doesn't resolve it. He asks you to sit in it with him, to stay, to witness, to participate consciously in the catastrophe instead of sleepwalking through it. Maybe that's enough. Being awake inside the nightmare, feeling it, naming it, refusing to look away even when looking breaks you. The hyperobject doesn't care if you understand it, but you are part of it, and that means something. It has to mean something, because meaning is what you make inside the meaningless, and you're still here, still making, still trying, still alive inside the thing that's eating you, still briefly able to say this is what it feels like. This is what it means. This is how we lived when the world was ending, and we knew it, and we stayed anyway. Thank you, you beautiful lot, for joining me on the exploration of hyperobjects, horror, and the world of Timothy Morton. If this episode left a mark, or if it made the catastrophe feel a little bit more bearable, then I would love to hear your thoughts. You can comment on our website, which is theobservingeye.com. That's where the podcast and a few little essays live every now and then. We're also on YouTube at youtube.com/@theobservingeye, and we are on social media. I always forget which ones. TikTok, Instagram, and X, all with the same handle, @theobservingeye. And I will try to get more content on those. I know I have been lax of late. I will do my best to put more things on there. I'm just, fighting that inner resistance. What else is there? There's the book. I should talk about this more often. There is a book that you can buy called The Observing Eye, and it is available on Amazon. And it's also on the website, theobservingeye.com. So you can buy it on Amazon because, Jeff Bezos, or you can read it for free on my website, which is theobservingeye.com. You can go and read it if you want. Probably not as fun as having a physical copy. There's something nice about having a proper book. But you can read it if you want. It's all on there. It's all free. Go and get some thoughts and stuff on that. It's a bit more psychology based than the podcast. So hopefully there's some stuff in there that you'll find useful. That's it for this week. I will be back next Sunday. I'm thinking about changing the day to Monday just to give me a bit more of a chill on Sundays. But we'll see how it goes. I will let you all know if I change the day of the podcast. It's on my mind. Because, I'd like to have a day off. Really. Be nice. Yeah, that's it, isn't it? There we go. I'm prattling on about nothing. Thanks, everyone. Take care. You know the usual. What do I say at the end? What do I say at the end? Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll catch you soon. There we are.